The digital clock on the nursery wall read 2:14 in the morning. I was sitting in the rocking chair in complete darkness, holding my 4-month-old son, Leo. He had a slight fever, and it had taken me almost 2 hours to finally coax him into a fragile, heavy sleep. His tiny head was resting against my collarbone, his breathing finally steady. Suddenly, the nursery door flew open and the overhead light flicked on, flooding the room with blinding white light. Leo jolted awake instantly, his small body going rigid before he started screaming at the top of his lungs. Standing in the doorway was my 24-year-old sister-in-law, Chloe. She was wearing a cocktail dress, holding her high heels in one hand, smelling heavily of gin and expensive perfume. She looked at me, completely unbothered by the screaming infant she had just woken up. "I left a pile of clothes in the laundry room," she said, her voice slurred but dripping with that familiar entitlement. "I need the silk blouse washed and steamed by tomorrow morning. And make me something to eat. I want something hot. Now." I looked at her, my eyes burning from exhaustion. I lowered my voice, trying to soothe my crying baby. I said, "No, Chloe, I am not your maid. The kitchen is downstairs. You can make your own food and you can wash your own clothes. Now get out of my son's room." She stared at me, her jaw actually dropped. Chloe had never been told no, not by her mother, not by my husband, and certainly not by me. She opened her mouth to scream at me, but before she could get the words out, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. My husband, Julian, appeared behind her. He had been asleep in our bedroom across the hall, but instead of asking his drunk sister why she was harassing his exhausted wife in the middle of the night, his eyes locked onto me with pure rage. "Why are you talking to my sister like that?" Julian snapped. I stood up, holding Leo tight against my chest. "I said, Julian, she barged in here and demanded I cook for her while I am holding our sick child. Tell her to leave." Julian stepped into the room. He didn't look at his son. He didn't look at the dark circles under my eyes. He walked right up to me, his face inches from mine. "Apologize to my sister," he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I shook my head. "I am not apologizing for setting a boundary in my own house," I said. What happened next is burned into my memory with absolute, terrifying clarity. Julian raised his hand and struck my face. He slapped me so hard that my head snapped to the side and my ears immediately started ringing. The force of it made me stumble backward. Leo shrieked in absolute terror, feeling the violent jolt of my body. The room went dead silent, except for my baby's panicked cries. I slowly turned my head back to look at them. Julian was breathing heavily, his hand still suspended in the air, but it was Chloe I looked at. She was standing behind him, her arms crossed, and a slow, incredibly satisfied smirk was spreading across her face. She was practically glowing. This was exactly what she wanted. She wanted to see me put in my place. She wanted to see her brother physically enforce the hierarchy of their toxic family. In that fraction of a second, something inside me completely snapped. The tired, accommodating, polite wife I had been for 3 years simply vanished. I shifted Leo securely onto my left hip, freeing my right arm. I took one step forward, reached past my husband, and I slapped Chloe directly across her smirking face. I hit her with everything I had. The smack echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Her head whipped back, and she let out a shriek of shock as a thin line of blood immediately welled up on her bottom lip. Julian lunged forward, yelling my name, but I stepped back, my eyes locked on his. "Don't you ever touch me again," I whispered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I turned around, grabbed the diaper bag I had secretly packed 3 days earlier, walked past both of them, and walked out the front door into the freezing night air. I did not look back. I put my son in his car seat, locked the doors, and drove away from the life I thought I knew. That was the night the illusion of my marriage violently shattered. But to understand how a husband becomes a monster, and how a sister-in-law becomes a dictator, you have to understand the silent, invisible trap I had been walking into for 3 years. Because the slap was not the beginning of the abuse. It was just the final, physical manifestation of a family that had been slowly bleeding me dry. My name is Clara. I was 28 the night I walked out. I met Julian when I was 25. I came from a very small, fiercely independent family. My parents were blue-collar workers who taught me the value of hard work, financial independence, and pulling my own weight. When I met Julian, he seemed like the perfect balance to my hyper-independent nature. He was charming, came from a wealthy family, and seemed incredibly family-oriented. I didn't realize until much later that in his family, being family-oriented didn't mean loving each other. It meant absolute, blind loyalty to a matriarch and absolute submission to the golden child. Julian's mother, Eleanor, was a woman who ruled her family with a velvet glove over an iron fist. Her husband had passed away, leaving her a fortune, and she used that money to control every aspect of her children's lives. But her absolute masterpiece was Chloe. Chloe was the baby of the family. She was 21 when Julian and I got married, and she had never held a job, never paid a bill, and never been told the word no. In the beginning, I tried to be the good daughter-in-law. I wanted to fit in. When we had Sunday dinners at Eleanor's massive estate, I was always the one clearing the plates, washing the dishes, and pouring the wine, while Chloe sat on the sofa scrolling on her phone. Eleanor would watch me clean and make these little passive-aggressive comments. She would say things like, "Julian needs a woman who knows how to serve her household. It's so good you don't mind doing the manual labor, Clara." I smiled and swallowed it. I thought I was earning my place in the family. I didn't know I was just auditioning for the role of their unpaid servant. Things shifted from uncomfortable to unbearable when I got pregnant with Leo. Julian convinced me that we needed to sell my small, premarital townhouse and use the equity to buy a larger home in his mother's upscale neighborhood. He promised it would be great for the baby to be close to his grandmother and aunt. I agreed, pouring my entire life savings and the equity from my property into the down payment of a gorgeous 4-bedroom house. The moment the ink was dry on the deed, Chloe practically moved in. She had a key given to her by Julian without my permission. She treated our home like a free luxury hotel. She would come over with her friends, drink our expensive wine, leave takeout boxes on the expensive rugs, and expect me to clean it up. Whenever I complained to Julian, he would gaslight me into oblivion. He would tell me I was being hormonal, that I was jealous of his bond with his sister, and that family always shares. But it wasn't until Leo was 2 months old that I discovered exactly what they were really sharing. I had been running on zero sleep, suffering from postpartum recovery, and desperately trying to keep the house clean while Julian worked and Chloe lounged around. One afternoon, Julian left his laptop open on his home office desk. I went in there looking for Leo's vaccination records, and I bumped the mouse. The screen woke up, displaying Julian's personal email inbox. Right at the top was an email from a local commercial bank, flagged as urgent. The subject line read, "Past due notice, boutique line of credit." I froze. Julian didn't own a boutique. He worked in corporate finance. But Chloe did, or at least she tried to. A year earlier, Chloe had decided she wanted to be a fashion entrepreneur. She rented a ridiculously expensive storefront downtown, bought thousands of dollars of inventory, and completely abandoned the project 6 months later when it got too hard. My heart started pounding in my chest. I opened the email. Attached was a PDF of the loan statement. I clicked on it, and my eyes scanned the document. The loan was for $85,000. The primary borrower was Chloe. The co-signer was Julian. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. Under the collateral section, the bank had placed a secondary lien on a property. Our property, the house I had paid the down payment for, the house my son lived in. I started digging. I went through his sent folder. I found emails between Julian, his mother Eleanor, and the bank officer. I found a chain of messages where Eleanor explicitly instructed Julian to use the equity in our home to fund Chloe's business, because Eleanor didn't want to liquidate her own stock portfolio. In one email, Julian expressed a brief moment of hesitation. He wrote, "Clara is going to notice the credit check if she pulls her report." Eleanor's response was chilling. She wrote, "She is too busy with the baby to notice anything. Just get it done. Her money is our family's money now. If she ever finds out, she won't leave. She has nowhere to go." I sat in that office chair, staring at the glowing screen while my baby slept in the next room. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had conspired to steal from me. They had leveraged the roof over my child's head to fund the whims of a spoiled brat, assuming I was too weak and too isolated to ever fight back. And then, I found the final nail in the coffin. Buried deep in a folder labeled tax documents, I found a scanned copy of a lease agreement for a luxury penthouse apartment downtown, Chloe's current apartment. The monthly rent was $6,000. The guarantor on the lease wasn't Julian. It was me. My name was printed clearly at the bottom, and next to it, an amateur, shaky forgery of my signature. Chloe had stolen my identity, likely grabbing my social security number from the tax files in the house to secure a luxury apartment because her own credit was destroyed from her failed business. And Julian knew. There were emails proving he knew and helped her cover it up by intercepting the mail. I didn't confront him that day. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I experienced a terrifying, absolute clarity. I realized that the man I married was nothing more than a financial predator wrapped in a nice suit, and his family was a cartel of narcissists. For 3 weeks, I played the ultimate role of the subservient wife. I smiled at Julian. I cooked dinner. I let Chloe leave her messes. But every single night when the house was asleep, I was awake. I took photographs of every single document, every email, every bank statement. I backed everything up to a secure cloud server that Julian didn't know existed. I forwarded copies to my mother. And I researched lawyers. I found a woman named Evelyn. She was a former corporate litigator turned high-net-worth divorce attorney. Her reputation was that she didn't just win cases, she destroyed reputations. I met with Evelyn on a Tuesday afternoon while Julian thought I was at a mommy and me class. I laid the entire stack of printed evidence on her polished glass desk. I told her about the emotional abuse, the stolen equity, and finally, I showed her the forged lease agreement. Evelyn looked over the documents in complete silence. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were cold and sharp. She said, "Clara, a divorce is a civil matter. What your husband and sister-in-law have done here is wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. These are federal crimes. How far do you want to take this?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "I want everything they took from me, and I want them to burn for the rest." We spent the next week quietly preparing the paperwork. We filed for a freezing order on all marital assets, ensuring Julian couldn't move a single dime once he realized what was happening. We prepared the divorce petition, the custody arrangement, and drafted a very specific letter to the commercial bank and the apartment leasing office regarding the fraudulent signatures. I was just waiting for the right moment to leave, and then the night of the slap happened. When Julian struck me in that nursery, he thought he was breaking my spirit. He didn't know he was just giving me the final piece of ammunition I needed. Because the moment I drove away from that house, I drove straight to the police station. I walked in with my baby, a red, swollen handprint clearly visible on the side of my face. I filed a domestic violence report. I had them take photos of my cheek, and I filed a restraining order against my husband, effective immediately. The next morning, while Julian was desperately blowing up my phone with fake apologies and demands to know where I was, he was served. He was served with the restraining order, meaning he legally had to vacate our home immediately. He was served with the divorce papers, and worst of all, he was served with a letter from Evelyn outlining our knowledge of the massive financial fraud. 2 weeks later, we had our first mandatory mediation session. We were in a massive glass conference room in downtown. I sat on one side of the table with Evelyn. Julian sat across from me with his lawyer. Eleanor and Chloe had insisted on being there, sitting behind Julian like a royal court, glaring at me with absolute venom. They still thought they had the upper hand. They still thought I was the weak little girl who washed their dishes. Julian's lawyer started with a completely arrogant tone. He offered me a pitiful settlement, demanding I drop the restraining order, and stating that the house equity would be split 50-50, completely ignoring the $85,000 lien. Evelyn didn't even let him finish his sentence. She opened her leather briefcase and pulled out 4 thick manila envelopes, sliding one to Julian, one to his lawyer, one to Eleanor, and one to Chloe. "Let's skip the theatrics," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with ice. "Inside those envelopes is undeniable, documented proof of wire fraud and identity theft. Julian, you conspired to place an $85,000 lien on a property my client paid the down payment for, without her knowledge or consent. Chloe, you forged my client's signature and stole her social security number to secure a luxury lease. The color instantly drained from Julian's face. Chloe opened her envelope, saw the copy of the forged lease, and physically gasped. Eleanor tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were trembling. "This is a private family matter," Eleanor snapped, trying to sound authoritative. "We can resolve this quietly." Evelyn laughed, a harsh, terrifying sound. "It stopped being a family matter the second your son struck my client in the face," she said. "Here is how this is going to go. Julian, you will assume 100% of the debt from the boutique loan. You will sign over your remaining share of the house equity to Clara to repay what you stole. Chloe, you will break your lease immediately and assume full financial penalty, and you will sign a sworn confession admitting to the forgery." Julian's lawyer looked panicked. He leaned over and whispered frantically to Julian. Julian looked up, his eyes wide with fear. "You can't do this, Clara," he pleaded. "You'll ruin us." I stared at the man I once thought I loved. I looked at the mother who treated me like dirt and the sister who smirked while I was abused. "If you do not sign these agreements by 5 p.m. today," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "Evelyn will hand this entire file over to the district attorney. Chloe will be facing felony identity theft charges, and Julian, you will be facing conspiracy and bank fraud. You won't just lose your job in finance. You will go to prison. And Eleanor, I will personally make sure every single one of your country club friends sees the emails where you orchestrated the theft of a mother's money to fund a failed clothing store." The silence in that room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total defeat. Chloe started crying, real, ugly tears of panic, begging her mother to fix it. But for the first time in her life, Eleanor had absolutely no power. The matriarch was broken. They signed everything. It has been exactly 1 year since that night in the nursery. Julian was forced to liquidate his entire retirement account to pay off the bank loan and cover his legal fees. Because of the domestic violence charge on his record, his corporate finance firm quietly let him go. He is currently working a mid-level accounting job, living in a tiny studio apartment. Chloe had to move back into her mother's house. Without Julian to steal from, and with a confessed forgery on her record, no landlord will rent to her, and no bank will give her a credit card. She is 25 years old, completely broke, and trapped under the thumb of a mother who is now utterly disgraced in their social circle. As for me, I sold that massive house, took my reclaimed equity, and bought a beautiful, bright home in a quiet neighborhood entirely in my own name. Leo is thriving. He is taking his first steps, surrounded by peace, love, and a mother who refused to be a victim. I look back at that girl who used to wash dishes for people who hated her, and I almost don't recognize her. But I am grateful to her, because she survived long enough for me to take over. When you spend years shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's toxic world, they assume you will stay small forever. They are never prepared for the day you finally stand up and burn their world to the ground. If you were in my shoes, holding your baby while a grown man demanded an apology for his spoiled sister, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have struck back? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in absolute, undeniable karma, hit that subscribe button for more stories. I'll see you in the next one.